I'm Ian Brzezinski, and welcome to our panel, New Energy Sources and the Global Power Equation. Is this Adam? Our panelists this morning are right next to me on my left, Jaroslav Pietras, Director General, Directorate for Environment, Health, Consumers, Education, and Culture at the Council of the European Union. To his left, we have Trygve Reven, Energy Policy Advisor at the Norwegian Atlantic Committee. To my right, Johan Hallen, Managing Director for Northern Europe of Westinghouse. And on my far right, Adam Witek from the Department of Energy Management and Development at KGHM, a Polish mining institution. And our goal this morning is to provide a strategic view of how the likely evolution of energy technologies, sources, markets, transportation links are going to affect the geopolitical balance of power, the strategic implications of not just shale gas, but also nuclear power, solar, and renewables and such. Before I kick off our discussion, let me make a couple contextual points. First, as everyone knows, global demand for energy is going to continue to grow, and that growth is going to be staggering. The U.S. Department of Energy estimates that energy consumption will go up by 50% by 2035. Most demand will come from the developing world. 2 billion people, John Lyman mentioned yesterday in one of the panels, still remain today without adequate access to energy. I love the factoid that China today has about 30 million cars, but in 10 years we'll have about 300 million cars. And an important factor is even with the growth of nuclear and renewable power, fossil fuels, according to these estimates from the Department of Energy, are going to remain the dominant source of energy and account for over half of the increased demand. Second, volatility, not stability, is going to be an enduring trait of global energy supplies. Look at the recent years. The good news, the discovery of shale gas, as discussed yesterday here in Europe and elsewhere. But also look at the Fukushima tragedy and its impact on nuclear power. Look at the key sources of energy for Europe, Africa, Middle East, and Russia. Not all key areas of stability. The unrest we see in the Arab world today, stretching from Tunisia to Yemen to Bahrain, maybe you can include Iran, is likely to be enduring. Third, energy is going to remain a tool of geopolitical leverage, and that leverage is going to be exercised. The control of energy is probably the most powerful weapon in the arsenal of soft power. And when you look at Central Europe, where we're meeting today, this, of course, is a region that's intimately familiar with the use of energy cutoffs as a means of state and quasi-commercial leverage. And I was just reading yesterday that Russia was trying to squeeze Ukraine with energy prices to force it to join the customs union, a clear geopolitical play. Add a fourth factor, because it concerns Central Europe. Central Europe still remains kind of a fractious island, separated from the West European market. These kind of realities are the foundation of European and transatlantic policy to diversify supplies, to increase the number of transportation routes, to seek new technologies, to new sources of energy. So let me start off by turning to Jaroslav. And one of the themes of our conference over the last day and a half has been, of course, shale gas. And I'd be interested in your view of how these discoveries of shale gas and their potential are likely to affect some of the huge energy infrastructure projects that we've been observing over the years. Nabucco, Nord Stream, South Stream. Links to Russian, to Central Asian, to Caucasus energy sources. How are the viabilities, how is commercial viability of these projects going to be affected by a sudden splurge or surge of shale gas from within Europe?
Yes, I think that you have made very good contextual points before. Because in context of new energy sources, one have to have a bit more holistic approach and long-term view. All these infrastructure projects can have also to be considered in a long-term understanding and analysis of the situation. one have to look not only about new sources of energy, as we've got in title of our panel, but also what happens to both sides of the equation, which is supply and demand. Demand is changing worldwide, but the question is to which extent and in which direction it changes in Europe. And to which extent Europe will require new sources of energy, and what kind of sources of energy we'll have. When you look at the decisions taken on various European fora, including the highest level, there is a tendency to rely much more on renewable energy. And then also to look for energy efficiency in various domains, including industry, consumption, buildings. And this will define the development and changes or evolution of European demand for energy. One could predict that the demand in Europe will be much less dynamic than in many other areas in the world. The demand for rapidly growing countries will grow rapidly. There is a bit of cliches which says these days, with a new technology, with a new approach, we could decouple economic growth from demand for energy. I think it's only partially true. In Europe, the growth of demand for energy is much smaller. Sometimes it goes in a different direction. But in many other areas, energy demand is growing in step with economic growth. And because the prospects for economic growth are still substantial, so there will be demand for energy. And this is a context for infrastructure projects in Europe. We've got a number of various other elements to this equation. The question is that the gas shale is changing a context because it relates to deposits that are on the territories of the EU member states. But then we could have also a large capacity. It's not only on south, but also by other directions. The question is whether it will not involve, to a large extent, redundant capacity and redundant projects. We have to also look at very large deposits that are in Caspian area, and from fields like Champs-Denis that potentially could deliver also huge amount. But the always question is that you could hear from industry, who is going to buy this gas in such large quantities? And so there is an equation where you have a limited perspective for growth of demand for gas, and also many more potential sources for gas and other energy sources for Europe. And so question of viability of this project is real.
Trigiv, let me follow up on Jaroslav's answer by asking you, if there's limited growth in European energy demand, and if all of a sudden there is a surge in new sources of gas and oil, what does that do to the centrality of Georgia and Turkey in Europe's energy security policy? Georgia, of course, is a strategic choke point for energy coming from the Caspian and from Central Asia, and has been a focus of major energy infrastructure projects. Turkey is already a hub, wants to be even a more important hub for energy. From Europe's perspective, in light of these this limited growth, new sources of gas, perhaps even from its own territory, how does that affect Europe's vision of the centrality of Georgia and Turkey in its energy security policy?
Well, I think it would obviously reduce the centrality, but still, of course, this is some of this shale gas needs to be found, proven, and developed in Europe. It is a very promising future scenario, though, and what I would certainly like to see is the effect of large shale gas development in Europe bringing gas back to basically a commercial thing. It has been a politicized and partly also security policy issue, at least for the past 10 years. But if we go back to the very start of the natural gas era of Europe, that was really the Groningen field, and then it was Willy Brandt's Ostpolitik that opened the way for imports of Russian gas. And since that time, there has been a discussion, really, in Europe of over-dependency on Russian gas. What I think what is needed is really for Europe also to come up with a solidarity policy and the means of a gas solidarity policy and the means of actually putting gas solidarity into practice by either, like in the IEA, working for oil, minimum storage requirements and supply possibilities going against the normal east-west routes. Much of the discussion in the later years has been really emanating from the Ukrainian transit disputes. And now we see that with the sort of reduced market requirements that comes out of the roadmap for European gas, published recently by the Directorate for Climate in Brussels, then the double pipelines in the Nord Stream pipeline would essentially render transit through Ukraine unnecessary. Whether there's then additional a need for the South Stream or even an Nabucco, I don't know. I think here we will have to see really what the member states in the EU decides in relation to the energy roadmap to 2050, which is due to be published later this year. But when you see the tempo of the shale gas revolution in the United States, and if you could really hope for something similar in Poland, clearly that would change radically the landscape and pave the way for a more balanced relationship to Russia.
Thank you. Johan, you work at Westinghouse. One could say the last 10 days have been kind of a rough rough week for the nuclear energy industry in Europe. Chancellor Merkel announced the plans to basically shut down nuclear power in Germany between now and 2022. Do you see Germany's decision as kind of the way of the future here in Europe?
Actually, Germany is probably the country in Europe that has taken the most dramatic decisions in the wake of the Fukushima event. And most other European countries have taken a very balanced approach and are in various ways continuing with their programs. So the short answer is not for the foreseeable future. What Chancellor Merkel announced, though, was a phase-out program over the course of 10 years, which tells a little bit about the length of these programs and these decisions. And likewise, for the countries now that are embarking on either modernizing their existing fleets or building new plants, it's the same type of horizon. So there are some changes, absolutely, because of the German decision, but the overall trend is still for a growing portion of electricity generation through nuclear.
You had mentioned to me yesterday that this region actually is the second most vibrant for nuclear energy in your view globally.
Well, of course, like in many markets of the world, Asia is the region where there's dramatic growth. There are numbers quoted in the range of 50, 100, even up to 200 plants being built in China. But in Europe, there are at least 50 identified projects that potentially over the next decade, next 15 years, could be built also in Europe. So Europe is a very vibrant and growing market, and I think that's in a very good way also exemplified by Poland.
Adam, your company, KGHM, is sort of on the consumer side of energy. It's a mining conglomerate, probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, industrial consumer of energy here in Poland. Your company is also an investor in energy. And I think it'd be interesting to hear from your kind of consumer perspective as a large company, what your concerns are about Poland's energy future, and what are the rationale behind some of the investments you're making into the energy industry as a company whose core business is mining?
Yes, yes. Core business is mining and produce of copper, but in Polish situation, when the EU CO2 policy limited build coal sources in Poland, we need in our strategy to build our own sources on our line, because KGM have 1,500 lines of distribution, and for example, we now build 2 sources on gas, about 40 megawatts each of them, and try build a big gas sources with Tauron company. Because in our business, one is very important, a price of energy. And I don't want one provider of energy. I would like to have a free market in Europe. And I can try build energy in Russia, Ukraine, Litva too, not only in Europe.
When you say build relationships in Russia and Ukraine, are you talking about making energy investments in Russia, Ukraine, or buying just gas energy from them?
No, we wanted to buy energy from Ukraine or Russia, and no investment on this moment. Agreements with Ukrainian company which produce energy.
Before I turn over to the audience in a town hall fashion, let me turn back to Triggev and ask about what's the impact on Russia of some of these energy changes that we're seeing. If Russia is losing a bit of its monopolistic control over energy in Central Europe, to a certain degree with Europe, what's that going to do to the Russian energy industry? Is it going to drive it into irrelevance, or is it going to help foster kind of reforms in that market so that companies operate more on a kind of transparent, rule of law basis that is kind of practice and expectations in Europe?
Well, I think there are some important boundary conditions here to observe. First of all, Russian exports to Europe constitutes about 25% of their total gas production, only 25%. So Russia is totally dependent on gas supplies for their domestic economy. At the same time, the Russian gas economy has been developed on the basis of 3 super huge fields, all of which are now in decline and to some extent in advanced degree of decline. And these reserves now have to be replaced by more expensive reserves in Yamal and in general to the north of Russia and in eastern Siberia. That work is progressing very well. It's a huge investment program, but after all, the infrastructure, the pipeline system, large part of that can also be used for the new fields. So if there is, I think the consequence of large shale gas discoveries inside the European market would mainly be an effect on gas prices and Russian gas export earnings. Because one might for the first time see a European market which approached the US market, where really there are so many producers that there is a real competition to supply. Then, of course, there is also a lower limit beyond which shale gas becomes uneconomic. So I don't think it would necessarily be a tremendous blow to Russian export earnings that there was a discovery of shale gas in Europe. But as I said previously, I think it would lead to a much more balanced relationship in gas between the expanded European Union and Russia. And that, I think, would be very beneficial to all of us.
Jaroslav?
Yes, but let me also say one thing which is very valid. I was at the discussion with one of the oil companies that was the manager of CEO of this oil company was asked when there will be a peak of production for oil. And he said probably it is not so clear when it will be, but not in a very near distant future. It has a longer future. From a technical point of view, and the shale gas shows it very clearly, deposits of energy resources in everywhere are much greater than we think. There is a question of price that we pay for it, and the question how we could use it. But there is nothing like technically picking of energy mining. If you would have a 1% less of copper in a deposits, you could find much more copper deposits in everywhere in the world. If you go to the more difficult deposits like shale gas, you discover it everywhere. The nature has got a pyramid of delivery of deposits, natural deposits. The sources which are very large, clean, and easy to access are very few and very concentrated. Sources which are much more difficult to reach are dispersed everywhere. And that's a major impact on geopolitical situation of the countries, because it shows, even if the shale gas is not really reached yet, it already has got an impact because it shows that there is always alternative that potentially could use, especially if the prices of energy will go up, and this will make more profitable. Secondly, development of technology could drive the cost of shale gas down to a level that it will keep the prices of the gas much lower. So the question for Europe and the relation with Russia is not so much how much oil we will come, how much oil or gas we will be able to produce or import. The question is, what is the political aim of Europe and how it decides about energy consumptions? And I wanted to turn attention to what you have said about a roadmap to 2050, where Europe wants to achieve a carbon-free economy more or less at that time, using much more of fossil fuels. And in this context, the gas plays a very important role, because you cannot so easily expand renewable energy. Even if you've got many sunny countries in Europe, like Germany, where you've got plenty of solar panels. But development of renewable energy is with a certain cost and additional difficulties. Gas and renewable energy could go hand in hand, because it's much easier to combine, to put in operation electricity production when renewable energy are having lower production because of a lack of sun or wind. So this makes a change, but I think it's very much related what Europe wants to achieve politically. If Europe wants to achieve politically much, and in a different aspect, because it's on climate, smaller use of energy and a different type of energy, then it will affect the geopolitical position of suppliers.